Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Barbara Nishaw, and this is Inside Applied Data Governance. Whether you're just starting out in data governance or you've been working in the field for years, this podcast is for you. You will learn real-life lessons and practical advice from the people behind the Applied Data Governance Practitioner certification. To learn more about the ADGP certification program, visit training.dataversity.net. Hello and welcome to Inside Applied Data Governance, a podcast where the practitioners who built the ADGP certification program share what real-world data governance actually looks like. I'm your host, Barbara Nishaw, and today we're talking to Jim Johnson, one of the key contributors to the ADGP certification, about obtaining stakeholder support and executive commitment for data governance. Let's jump right in. Hi, Jim. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Barbara. Thank you. How are you?
Doing wonderful. Wonderful. And I'm so excited to talk to you about this. Our subject today is actually one of my favorites, about getting stakeholder commitment. I spent a lot of time doing that in my career as well. So I'm very excited to hear your insights. But before we get started on that, let's just tell our listeners a little bit about you. Why don't you start off with telling us about your background in data governance?
Well, I really got my start officially in data governance when I heard the term data governance in, I think it was 2014 at a DGIQ conference. So I had spent my career in every job fixing things, making process better, making the data better. And it really never made sense to me until at that conference, I realized, holy cow, I've been doing this for a while and it actually has a name now. So that was kind of exciting. It all comes down to standardizing things, making your processes better, really building trust in the data and information assets. My approach prior to understanding DG was read the manuals, learn the tools, create standards, automate everything you can, and build trust and integrity in all of the data information. And then, of course, at the conference, I learned all kinds of other things like metadata, master data, and all these, crazy terms that started making sense to some of the problems I had encountered. I've been cross-sector. I've worked in pharmaceutical, banking, health insurance, quick service restaurants, healthcare, and most recently background screening. Every industry has something that you can learn and apply to other industries. So that has been really valuable to me. I've learned so much from each industry that I've taken all of that forward with all the other industries that I've worked in. Data is data no matter what sector you're in. What changes is data governance, the scope, and the art of applying it, which is why the applied part of this is so drastically important.
Thank you very much for telling us a little bit about your background. And you just talked about it with the applied data governance approach to it. How did you get involved whenever we started this certification program?
So we're going to go back to DGIQ again. So I think it was a couple of years ago, Tony and Shannon approached me at the conference. And I think Tony said, I want to talk to you about a special project. And of course, part of me is like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. And the other part's like, what's he talking about? So we end up going out to the balcony at the Catamaran here in San Diego. And we had a long conversation. And he started talking about, well, what do you think about building a body of knowledge? And what do you think about certification? And we had this back and forth. I was in from the moment he mentioned it. It's something I've been thinking about for a while. Ever since I obtained my CDMP certification, the thought in the back of my mind was, why don't we have a data governance certification? It makes us real, right? And the example I gave him was when I was in healthcare, a friend of mine who was the EDW architect for the healthcare system that I was working at, he said, whenever you work with doctors, I have one piece of advice for you: you should wear a tie. And we were casual. We were on the IT side and we weren't wearing ties to work. And I asked him why. And he said, the doctors take you more seriously. And so that's what certification does, right? It helps make things more real. And as soon as Tony started talking about it, I said, I don't care how long it takes, I'm in. We need this. It's going to help so many people in their positions, and it's going to help executives and leadership in many organizations also realize that this is a real thing, and we need the credibility and the seriousness of your commitment to help us, which is, again, why stakeholder support is so darn important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I surely enjoyed working with you. And we spent a lot of time together on that certification program. One of the things I think that makes ours a little different is the applied approach. Why do you think that was so important for this certification?
theory is the skill. It represents a perfect world, perfect conditions, perfect data, perfect behaviors. And it's almost like, the demonstrations when IT vendors come in and they pitch their tool, the demo's perfect. I mean, that's not reality, because you go to implement that tool and you realize that there's all kinds of challenges that are not represented in the perfect world. That's theory. It's a concept. It's perfect on paper. You can refine it indefinitely, but you don't really know whether it works. And then it's also retrospective. It's based on what we know, what we can observe, and what we believe is possible based on what we know and observe. So now let's talk about application. This is where it gets real. You walk out of the theory and you're in the real world, and conditions change, and data is messy, and people are challenging, and culture is strong. And you have to put theory to the test and see what works and what doesn't. And if it does work, how well does it work? And you discover gaps and assumptions and about your theory or your understanding of it. And then you start to troubleshoot everything in real time. And that's where the rubber meets the road. Application is all about perspective. It's creative and forward-looking. And without theory, it's guesswork. But with theory and this feedback loop that you create by trying things and learning from them, you're troubleshooting in real time. And that's really the true value of application. You can't learn that from a textbook. So there's a saying, I think it goes, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is, right? So if you're data, if you're a data or IT person, I mentioned earlier, the perfect demos, that's theory. It's a vision. You can work towards it, but it's going to take you time. If you're not a data or an IT person, then it's very similar to a road trip. Theory is your perfectly planned map, your itinerary. The moment you hit the road, you have to react to anything that comes up, an accident, a detour, something in the backseat that has to go to the bathroom every hour. Learning from that on the fly is what application is all about. And this learning from experts all collected together makes that easier for everybody else that's in the same situation.
That's a good way to describe it. And I like your car analogy. And that's really why our training that prepares you for the certification exam is so important, because it really gives you all those examples and the videos and information from practitioners who are doing it on a day-to-day basis. So.
Yeah, indeed.
All right. Well, now let's jump into our topic for today, stakeholders and executive buy-in. Let's go here for the first question. Whenever we were originally, you're thinking about what all should go into the body of knowledge, why was it so important to include this key part about stakeholder engagement and executive buy-in? Why was it so important? What would have been missing if we didn't have it?
So I think it's particularly important to everyone who works in an organization without a data and or data governance leader. So every time I'm at conferences or with my tribe of people, we're always troubleshooting, how do I get started? What do I do? And that all leads to inevitably a question, well, do you have a CDO? Because that's a person at the executive level with singular authority for all things something, right? So CDO is data, maybe data governance. What do you do without it? You're dealing with cultural challenges, politics, shifting priorities, and data governance in essence is organizational change. It influences change and improvement over the long haul. It doesn't directly impact sales or bring in revenue right away. So there's a lot of, consternation and questioning that happens with data governance, and an executive leader can cut through a lot of the bureaucracy and the red tape and pave the way for at least awareness conversations, educational, types of events, to really get people more comfortable with the idea of how do we manage our data better. And I think it all comes down to, if you're going to manage data as an asset, then you need to treat it like an asset and manage it accordingly. And so that's kind of new and different to a lot of people, even though we're familiar with it through finance and HR and supply chain and IT. But we're taking a slightly different approach to it, and it really leaves us challenged with breaking through all of that red tape and bureaucracy. Basically, if we had excluded it, I think practitioners would be left with discovering and dealing with what I think is one of the top 3 reasons a data governance program fails. The executive sponsor can make it or break it. Having it can support success. Not having it, in my opinion, drastically increases the risk of failure. And one of the first things that a practitioner has to do is go find that executive sponsor. it's sort of like, I think at one of the conferences, we were asked a question of how would you describe it? And everybody had to create an image or find an image that represented. One person had, I think it was Atlas with a world on his shoulders. Another person had the person pushing the proverbial boulder up a mountain. And mine was herding cats, because it's like, the real problem is people, right? And then one of my best friends, professional colleagues, and a DG practitioner for years described it as you're pulling the Titanic upstream all by yourself. And what you really need is an executive sponsor to be the captain, allow you to be the navigator, and work together and staff that Titanic so you can actually move it.
That's great. I used a cat analogy myself, except for I said it was feral cats.
Yeah.
Herding feral cats.
It can be.
Yeah.
Untrained feral cats.
Yeah. A little extra challenge.
Entry-level analysts to executive data leaders, DATAVERSITY delivers the most comprehensive training in the industry, led by experts who are actually doing the work. Upskill with on-demand courses, earn exclusive certifications, and join a global community of data pros committed to driving real change at dataversity.net.
And you alluded to this a little bit in your previously, but what do you think is the biggest thing that people misunderstand or underestimate about obtaining the executive commitment?
I think there's two things that people misunderstand the most. One is that data governance is organizational change. And I talked about that. We have to change people's behaviors as it relates to data and how they interact with and use and manage data. And you can't change behaviors until you change mindsets. And that's point number two. Data governance is essentially a people problem. It's people and process over tools and data. I bucket everything in those four categories. And so if you understand that it's organizational change and we have to address the people aspects of it, it makes it a lot better. What we underestimate, in my opinion, is organizational data literacy. I've been doing this for 20 years. Don't tell me how to do my job. Yes, but doing things in Excel manually and then storing your Excel workbook on a file share with no password and sensitive data inside it is probably not the best way to do it. So data governance is going to help elevate organizational data literacy through training and education efforts around what it means to make data management better. So in my college job, there was a facility across the street from my building that was a full-blown training center. And I've never seen this since. This was I won't say when, it was more than 20 years ago. But they taught classes in things like WordPerfect when that was a thing, and word processing and spreadsheets and different, cultural and business kinds of things. And I loved it. I took every class I could. I've yet to see an organization, unless they have a really mature data governance program, have full-blown training around data management and what it means to engage and embrace data protection and all these other things that data governance brings to the table. So that's the value it brings. And if we don't correctly understand that and under or overestimate things, I don't think we're going to hit the mark on any of it.
Good point. Definitely. What does it actually look like? Again, this leads a little bit on from your previous answers, but what does it look like to gain sponsor stakeholder support, whenever you're really doing it, especially early on in the maturity of data governance within an organization?
Yeah, early on it's challenging. It's you don't have the visible signals to look for that are along the lines of formal committees and formal decisions and policies and processes to follow. It's very informal, it's relational, it's volatile. It's a lot of conversations to get perspectives aligned and build trust. If you get a green light to go do things and figure it out, that's more lip service. They're saying like, okay, there's something here that I kind of understand and trust, but I don't want to get too involved. So you can go off and do that. But you might have shifting priorities and false starts. And so as you're engaging all these conversations, you have to also gauge the level of support and interest from these stakeholders. And so if they get excited and start asking questions or probe a little bit, that's good. If they their eyes glaze over and they go silent or they disappear altogether, that's not good. It's a lot of constant communication, emotional IQ, finding early adopters. And then those that are willing, you build the trust get them to socialize everything that you're talking about. If you've got quick wins and efforts along the way, socialize that as well. Educate peers at their levels, as well as their direct reports down the reporting lines. And it's all about fostering awareness and support through communication. And you spend most of your time doing that.
Yes. A lot of time talking and a lot of time explaining.
Over and over.
Over and over again, yes. What's one piece of advice that you would give? You've talked about a lot of different things, but what's one piece of advice you would give to gain?
So this is so hard because there's so much advice to share, right? I decided that, there's this really good there's one technique that I've used several times that is actually really effective. And so it's a two-parter, and the advice actually comes with part two. So first part is as you're scoping and looking for stakeholders, ask them what keeps you up at night. And the ones that open up and start telling you truth about what really does keep them up at night, you're going to get a boatload of understanding about how the company operates, what their challenges are, what, truly they're lying at 3 o'clock in the morning wondering, how am I going to do this for my job? And they're an executive, right? So how do you help them? So now we're going to get to part two. Well, you could actually, if it's related to data and data management in any form, there may be ways that data governance can help. And so you can kind of inject in that conversation and say, hey, how about if I've got some ideas, maybe I can go flesh some things out. Maybe we can circle back in a week or two and I might be able to help you. And if you get a green light, great, go do it. Now, here's the advice. Don't come up with a 100% plan. You do not want to come back with anything that's 100% ready to go, what you envision being everything, because number one, it's not going to reflect reality unless you've been at the company longer or just as long as the executive. But number two, if you ask them, what am I missing? And they point anything out, you are now getting buy-in from the early part of this process. And they'll start to get more and more involved as you have this conversation. You might discover there's a few things that you're missing. And once you get them on board with that, you can then go off and execute your plan. You're probably going to be a lot more successful. And once they see that you mean what you say and you deliver, even if it's a small win, just one undeniable success, you have now found a stakeholder.
Oh, that's great advice. Really focus on those wins, get their buy-in, and then grow from there.
Yep.
Great.
Absolutely.
So what causes stakeholder support for data governance to remain passive rather than active? And what is the impact on the progress of data governance?
So, there's so many reasons, right? I think probably among the most common reasons are no personal or professional risk. They just don't have any skin in the game. Success doesn't help them. Failure can't be tied to them, or maybe it could be tied to them and they want to avoid that. So you got to find people that have some skin in the game, which means maybe a problem that you have in common or a problem you can help with. They could be overwhelmed, too many competing goals, priorities, limited budget. Maybe they just don't have physical or cognitive bandwidth to help. Maybe they don't understand or know how they can help. I ran into that a lot at the executive level because they're so far removed from the work. It's kind of hard for them to connect the dots and understand, why should I help you when all my problems are getting solved? That kind of stuff. They tend to default to passive observation. And so that's one of the signals that you might look for, that, wow, they're just, I don't know, they're very passive. How do you turn that around and get them active? That's, you got to understand what these passive signals are. I think the political exposure for a lot of executives is one of the top ones. If you're supporting anything related to change, you may be sticking your neck out or going out on a branch, to borrow some cliches, or rocking the boat. Might as well throw that one in there as well. If they're not 100% sure, they're going to keep a little bit of distance, a little bit of protection, maybe have a back out or an exit strategy in case things go haywire. Those are some of the impacts as well, right? They may start and then they may disappear, and then you got to start all over again. So it's good to look for all those things. From the non-people standpoint, I think your pace slows, decisions grind on and on for weeks and weeks. We're still talking about the same thing 3 months later. Progress starts to trickle. Folks in organizations emulate leaders. What leaders say and do, they follow. And if they see the sponsor doesn't care, then they're not going to care, and they're going to have other priorities. It's not going to seem relevant or important. And that's part of the reason that the progress will kind of slow. Morale will drop as well. you'll see the squeaky wheel start to get the grease. The loudest voices get the budget, the priorities. Data governance is not at the table yet. And so you're going to be put on the side burner or the back burner altogether. Or you'll have sudden death where data governance is the first thing to get cut during layoffs or budget cuts. And that's no fun. And that happens because there's nobody there to speak up or defend it. So all of these impact data governance in the short term and the long term. Short term means you might have to restart. You may have to change direction. You have a lot of time and energy invested, and it seems not to matter, which could cause DG staff morale. And in the long term, it hurts the organization simply because you're not really elevating the data literacy along the way, and you're starting over on that as well. So passive is oftentimes the death of a data governance program, in my opinion.
Yeah. And that's a strong way to end that question answer, because it can be. And we mentioned a little bit about this, about communication and how important it is. How should governance leaders tailor their messages for executives versus the operational teams?
Yeah, this is a really good question, and it really strikes at the heart of how important communication is. You have to tailor your messages to the audience and gauge how much they understand and don't. And you can mix a little bit, but there are some clear differences between executives and operational teams. One thing that I use, or one approach I use rather, with executives is the 30-second elevator pitch. You got to get right to the point. It has to have enough context and detail to get them hooked and understand it and walk away thinking about it, but not be so in the weeds that they're lost and won't even remember the 30-second elevator pitch. If you have a little bit more time, you can engage in, I think Lean and Agile have different ways of doing this. In healthcare, I learned a process called SBAR. It means situation, background, awareness, and recommendation. And so on one page, you say, here's what's going on. Here's how we got here. Here's what you need to know about it. And then here are a couple options with the pros and cons. And I'm going to tell you which one I think is best. And so you've laid out, it's almost like I think it's called a decision paper in some industries. You've laid out what they need to know, and everything that's relevant is right there, and they can go through all that. So I would do that with executives. I actually have employed some of those approaches at my DG council meetings too, with VP and CXO levels. Operational teams are different. You have to get in the weeds. These are the people that are living and breathing all of the workflows and the data movement, the data processes, et cetera. And so you have to create clarity of what exactly we're talking about. You have to link it to their day-to-day jobs. You have to connect it ideally to leadership goals and plans, so they understand the importance and the urgency of why we're asking them to do something. And then they require tactical direction. You can't have ambiguity. They will pick all of your verbiage apart, looking for flaws. There's a lot of pressure to get things done around them. You have to be clear on definition of done or success criteria. Here's the problem. Here's what it's going to look like when we solve it. Do you have any questions and concerns? You got a white glove treatment them all the way through that conversation and get them comfy with it. Look for roadblocks, like what are you working on? What is gonna, interfere? And some of this you can't even do face to face. You got to do it asynchronously because they need blocks of time to work. And so can you craft it in an email or put it in your ticketing system or get into an existing meeting and put it in the materials that are disseminated? You got to find ways to accommodate that as well. And then keep them organized and actionable, and headings and formats so that they can quickly scan it, because they are by far the busiest folks. If you're going to give them a voluminous amount of information, you need to have it organized and clear.
That's great. It does boil down to a lot of our job is communication when we're working with stakeholders, executives, anyone at any level. Communication is on us to be able to speak to them in the right language.
And I think so get back to the art that we were talking about earlier, right? Data governance people get very adept at switching communication styles and content and messaging on the fly. Like you walk in thinking, oh, I got it. And I prepared because I know it's going to be an elevator pitch. And then one executive asks a question and you got to go do a deep dive for 5 minutes. So you have to be prepared.
Yes, you do. Definitely. All right. Well, here's our last question. What signals tell you that a stakeholder is truly committed, not just verbally aligned, but really believes it?
Yeah, so verbal, let's talk about what it doesn't look like, and then we can jump into what it looks like. So verbal alignment is always conversational. It's cheap praise. It's smiling and nodding. It's zero effort, zero risk. Maybe they don't even show up, right? So, okay, that's great. True commitment, in my opinion, becomes behavioral. So they put their money where their mouth is. They actually do things that show support or directly help you. So it could be they reach out proactively, they stay engaged, they ask a lot of really good questions because they want to know. If you have anything that you're presenting as like a recommendation or a plan, the moment they start asking questions, they're already starting to think about how they're going to be able to articulate this to their people or relate it to a problem they have. Those are all really good signs. They will also spend their own political and other capital or resources at the organization. They're going to allocate people, maybe their top performers. They're going to remove roadblocks, bureaucracy, and the resistors. They're going to show engagement in interactions with you and any sort of data governance forums. They come prepared. They drive discussion and ask questions, especially the tough and uncomfortable questions. That's a really good sign of engagement. And what they're sort of alluding to is this sense of shared accountability. If I'm doing this out in the open with you in front of other execs and maybe some VP and director level folks, I'm sort of early indicating that I want to support this, and if we can work through all this and get comfy with it, then I'm going to walk out of here and I am going to support you. Pay attention in non-DG meetings and forums too, because you'll see all these patterns and behaviors, and that's going to help you figure out how to gauge culture and who supports what and who doesn't. And then if you can learn enough from all of that, you can actually factor that into your communications and your audiences before you even walk in and try everything that I just described.
Wow. That's really a good way to end our podcast today. So it really breaks it down for people and makes it real. So thank you very much for joining us today, Jim. This has been a great conversation. And thank you so much for everything that you did for the Applied Data Governance Practitioner certification.
It was a pleasure to be here and to help with the certification and the body of knowledge. What a delightful conversation I always have with you, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Jim. For our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about the ADGP certification program and the Applied Data Governance body of knowledge, visit training.dataversity.net. Until next time, I'm Barbara Nishaw, and this has been Inside Applied Data Governance.